Krista Tippett. Well, I usually like to start out
On
with this.
religion.
Tell me something about your spiritual upbringing. Why is it glad? That's what she always starts with.
Spiritual upbringing.
Well, she doesn't try to, box people in. I'm assuming you're a Christian, so tell us a little bit about your life.
No, I'm with you there. Obviously, just church and community were the things you did for us growing up, and we were part of a church start, which was a cool dynamic, cool community to be a part of. We started worshiping in our basement.
Your own family's home, basically?
Yeah, the basement of our family's home, and choir practice was held there for quite a while because we had a piano, and it was, it was a place that was in the dry to meet, and then we started meeting in an old schoolhouse that was rented. It was out of use, but it was a pretty interesting place to grow up going to church, to have broken window panes in the big auditorium where we met for worship. And
were you old enough when your parents shifted from an established church to the new start?
I was maybe 4 or 5 when the process started, and we had attended the downtown church. I really have very little recollection. The place where I was reared early was Central United Methodist downtown in Spartanburg. And then we moved out to the suburbs, and that's where the church was begun. And, there are very vivid memories of, foosball as communion. There was a foosball table up on the second floor, and the kids would gravitate there and have to be chased towards their Sunday school classes when the time came. And it was not as far as I remembered, it was not an air-conditioned space, and so hot in the summer and cold in the winter, and had to call off church a few times because of the elements. And then a very memorable experience growing up was my dad was guest preaching, and his text was the wind of the Spirit blows where it will, and a big gust of wind came through one of the broken panes of glass and blew his sermon text or his sermon notes all over the floor, and he said, "Well, I guess the Lord has spoken, and that's what there is for today." It was just a funny moment of unscripted stuff, but it was a good thing. It's wonderful to be a part of a place that's growing and changing, and there were. Worship was traditional, but it was certainly less restrictive than in some contexts. And Don Barrett was the pastor, and most definitely had an influence on me and the questions I would ask. And then if ever I asked, usually it was Dad, a question, I would start with Mom, and then she would send me downstairs and I'd talk to Dad, and he would answer my question with a question, and send me, give me a scripture or two to consider, and there weren't necessarily answers provided, but always good questions, and so I very much appreciated that. Early on, there was also just a sense, whether I understood it or not, of I was watching, I think, Don do what he did, and internalizing some of that, whether I knew it or not, and then worship was just a joyful thing, and I watched both my parents sing in the choir, and often the ebullient expressions on their faces, the expressive ways they would sing along with the others in the choir, communicated the enjoyment of worship to me early. And then early experiences visiting some family friends in the Low Country, who, in retrospect, I can recognize that there were all kinds of kind of dynamics within the relationship that weren't right and weren't healthy and weren't as they should be. But Chance and Susie had lived adjacent to some land that my grandfather owned, and they were kind of the stewards of that. And Chance was a laborer, and he had also gone for years to Morris College and gotten a certificate in preaching and evangelism. And he was an evangelist, and he would proclaim the gospel in ways that were just kind of rich and beautiful and textured in ways that I had never heard expressed. And so very, I was young and 8 or 9 and visiting this couple that she sang spiritual songs, and he recounted from memory great swaths of scripture. And one day, I've actually said this one other place, that, but it's worth repeating, that they were talking about. He had his shirt off. It was in the summertime in the heat of the Low Country, and he was sweating and had been working, as well as he had his Bible on his lap on the porch, and he said, and again, this is the way I remember it. He said, I was reading the scripture, and the Spirit drive the heat in me, and I have to take my shirt off. And it was so vivid and real and legit for him that he was hot because the Spirit was moving, and he recounted the story of Abraham and Isaac, and he told the whole story in a way that was just, definitely not Sunday school. And then his wife would sing these beautiful songs, and so that experience, I had visited a couple of times and had experiences similar to that, and Chance was this kind of, larger than life. He was a not a huge man, but a strong fella who had worked all his life, and the passion that he had for the story and the gospel impressed me. So one day he had, maybe my second or third visit, and he said to my mom, whom he referred to as Miss Cross, he said, "Miss Cross, is that your boy?" And I said, and she said, "Yeah, Chance, this is Chris." And he said, "That boy got the mark. He gonna be a preacher." And I just remember thinking, ducking behind mom and going, what is this? Yeah, and so that I had actually not remembered that for years, and I was in my first year of seminary, and that this faint memory came to me about that, and I asked Mom about it, and she said, "Oh yeah, that's exactly how it happened." And so I attribute part of my calling to Chance speaking that mark into existence, whether it was there before he said it or not. So their stories and songs contributed to my kind of appreciation of the mystery. Obviously, at that point, you're not doing a lot of heavy lifting theology-wise, but I knew it was more complicated than the worship we just had every Sunday.
Right.
Yeah.
When you went to Wofford, what did you imagine?
Oh man, I was blissfully carefree about them, honestly. was a Spanish major early on, and had finished that by my junior year in terms of the major work, and just enjoyed the kind of rush of varied information I was getting from all the different classes, and I had a pretty steadfast refusal to focus, which was I recognize now as a double-edged sword. It was both made life very, very interesting and didn't, practically speaking, get me prepared for one vocation over another. And so by the time I finished Wofford, I didn't have any firm plans. Any firm plans I may have made were kind of derailed by the travel year and then an illness year. And so I sort of found myself for a year in where I could go off and not be Chris Barrett for that season, in terms of the roles you fill and don't know you're filling, and the ways you occupy yourself on campus, the role you kind of build for yourself and then have to live into, whether it's suited to you or not. And so selling bagels for a year was very grounding and very, I renovated the kitchen of the house where I was staying. So I was sort of still exploring. I actually reflected on this the other day and hadn't thought about it for years, but international business was my inclination, just because I was going to go to the MIBS program at USC and just make some money, explore the world, and see what happened. And like I almost got a job when I was in Winston-Salem. I was one of 2 finalists for a job at a hinge company. Like, they were a cabinet hardware company I think from Germany, and they were looking for somebody to do their Latin American market, spread it. And so, they took me seriously as a candidate, which was crazy now to think about. But I was young and I was energetic, and I was, they opted for the other person, which was, in retrospect, a good thing. But I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had, sold hinges for a while. But by April, I was kind of still at loose ends, and I determined, well, I can't make, $13,000 a year for long. So I applied to some divinity schools with an MTS in mind, and I was going to go into academia like my father before me. I visited Vanderbilt and Duke, and yeah. So anyway, Vanderbilt's offer was actually much better than Duke's, and was appealing, but I didn't feel at home there in a way that I had. Will Williman is responsible for that largely, and Will Williman, God bless him, is also responsible for giving me the impression that the ministry was a field in which intellectual and spiritual could go hand in hand, and practical, and so he almost gave me permission to consider that as a vocation. So yeah, that I hold Will responsible for it. So I started in Blacksburg, and doubled my Bagel Boy salary.
Right off the bat.
Yeah. However, I had accrued just about that much in debt at Duke, and so when you're making what you owe, you learn to run a tight ship, and so lived what I thought was extravagantly, and served 2 churches in Cherokee County, and they couldn't have been more different, separated. You had to drive 14 and a half miles to get from one to the other, but they were, as a crow flies, they were separated by a river, so as a crow flies, they were very close. And so, very different personalities.
What would you describe those years as like? How would your reflection back on that you put years of ministry?
Oh my gosh, you know, ping-ponging back and forth between misery and absolute freedom. I mean, you know, it's just, I had never heard of a charge conference form. And, you know, the 3rd month on the job, you're faced with this thing that you're like, what? All of these forms, and that's just my nightmare. And so I just remember the heat that would rise and the sweat, and then just like you're stressing over things that in the end, by the end of your ministry, you know, are only going to be perfunctorily attended to ever. Yeah, we were doing Iron City Ministries, and I was also establishing relationships with people that are still, you know, characters in my. Elise and I look back and just howl at the. I mean, I hope she will never see this. She's going to outlive me, God bless her. But this woman named Mary Nell Hess, whose husband Earl had worked in for Duke Power and had contracted asbestosis from the materials they had handled, and she had gotten the same condition from washing his clothes, and she had been a security guard. Mary Nell was not a person to be trifled with. She was a force of nature, and she was a chain smoker who was on oxygen because her lungs weren't working, and she was also a self-declared prophet, and could regale you with stories, biblical and other things that would just. It was so. She remains unique among the characters I have met, and Mary Nell was a woman of many words and very strong opinions, and then there was the treasurer of the church, who was a just lovely loony lady named Eleanor, who had been a math teacher for many years and was brilliant with numbers and kooky as all get out in every other respect. And she had this very, very subtle way, but not so subtle, of, you know, insisting that I come by her house for the check, which essentially meant that twice a month she got a pastoral visit. And she was funny. So Eleanor was arch enemies with a man who had been a pharmacist for many years, who was named Hootie Adair. And Hootie was the most nattily dressed. He drove an Arnold Palmer Cadillac. He was, you would think he was, you know, he was dressed to the nines all the time. He was impeccably not only tailored, but he had a $5,000 toupee from Atlanta that he would go quarterly to have them service and wash and style. And so Hoot lived up to his name. He was a hoot, and so I called her Eleanor, but it was Eloise. I don't know why I said Eleanor, but so he and Eloise would go to the same cafe in Blacksburg and carpet each other from across tables, and Hoot would bemoan to me. He would take me every Tuesday for dinner, and for the first period of time he drove, and then I learned that I needed to drive. But we would go out for dinner on Tuesdays, and I mean, the only thing he had to talk about was that damn Eloise and her lies. And I mean, she never let the truth get in the way of a good story. She was just always, you know, making up the most cockamamie stories and telling the stories of history, but telling them slant, and that just drove Hoot crazy. But they also virtually couldn't live without each other. They were, you know, opposing forces that needed each other, and so they were such characters, and that was a period of time where there was time and space. There was a cabinet maker in the congregation who allowed me to use his facilities, and we had cleared wood out of my grandfather's store, and I learned to do some things I hadn't done with wood, and had.
How long were you in Plattsburgh?
3 years.
And then you went from there to